All right, so now we're looking at step 4 here. We've had our dough that's been sitting about three and a half hours. I actually put it in the oven with the light on, which probably made it about 75, 80 degrees. So we got some nice rise in there. Now, every hour, I took this apart. Now, as I mentioned, you got to fold it, give it a little better idea. Remember, we Crisco'd this bowl, so it should come out nice and easy. Stretch it, fold it, turn it, do it again. That's what you would do. Not really necessary at this point for me to do that again, but wanted to kind of show you what it was. Next thing we're going to do is shape the bread into the bowls that we want it to take, right? So let's generous flour here. If there's a bit of wood showing and this dough touches it, it's going to stick and you have to scrape it off, right? So you definitely want to be liberal with the flour that you put on here. Don't worry about it drying out the bread or anything. This is a trivial amount in the context of things. So quick science piece, right? So we had the first kind of 20 minutes that we mixed the dough, if you recall, before we added the salt. That's called the autolyzing. That's the first thing that happens with the bread and the flour kind of binding together, the water and the flour binding together. After we salted it, we let it go in this bowl. That's called the primary fermentation, right? So that's where the starter's starting to eat up some of the flours that we have in there. It's building up bubbles. It's turning into a more mature dough. But we don't want to take it from here and go right into the oven because it's not really in a good shape for us. And so what we're going to do now is prepare it for the secondary fermentation. The primary is also called bulk fermentation at times. I'm going to take this puppy out, put it on here, on the surface, bench cutter, cut it in half. So you got two approximate size. It's fine if they're not perfect, right? Let's put one over to the side for a moment. Now this is the key here, that what I like to do, there are different techniques for this, but this is going to have some big bubbles in here, right? And we kind of want to work these bubbles out because if they remain as they are, it's going to continue to rise. And that's where you get those big honking holes in the bread that are not ideal. You want a kind of a more consistent crumb. So what I do is I stretch the top. I'm going to get a little close here. You can see some little bubbles coming up. Right? You want to stretch right through those. And you're stretching it and tucking it underneath with your hands. You don't care what this side looks like. What you're aiming for is this is going to be the top of the bread. If it starts getting a little tacky, just roll it back in the flour. Kind of spread the flour around a little bit. Makes it much easier to work with. But you want to stretch this dough here. And that's going to be evident when we cut this later. You'll see the grain of the holes kind of going this way, if that makes sense. There's another little bubble there, right? We want to get those guys out. So you want to stretch, make it nice and smooth, push it out. And what we're going to want to do is set this into something that we want the shape of the bread to be. And in this case, we're going to go for a round bowl. Probably the most popular. Now, I mentioned in the other video, well actually it's a video you watch after this, just record them in different order. A brocorb or a bataton. This is a great resting place to form your bread, your loaf, right? So if I have my loaf here, again, pinch it up, place it in there, try to pinch these ends together best you can, right? This guy's gonna kind of sit in here for a bit. It's gonna sit in here for a while. So this guy is actually seasoned just much like a cast iron would be seasoned with rice flour. There are plenty of tutorials out there how to do that. You basically spray it with water, cake it with rice flour, shake it out. But the idea is this is caked nicely so that later on, when we dump this out of here, it'll freely fall out without sticking to anything and maintain its structure. So this other piece, we're gonna do the same thing here. If you don't have one of these, take a kitchen towel, put it in a bowl, dust it heavily with flour, and you could lay it right in there. If you have a nice bowl, if you have a loaf pan, you could do it that way. But this is something that it's not going to cook in this. This is simply for the next phase of that fermentation. So this guy's looking pretty good. He's kind of happy in here, right? I have a little cover. Some folks like to have the cover in and put the bowl into the bread inside that. I like going directly onto the wood kind of bamboo type situation, that whatever that stuff is. So now I have the dough in here. And what we're going to do with this bowl is let it sit. Now, this is where you could do a number of things. You could leave this on the counter for 2 hours and bake it. You could have it on the counter for a little bit. I'm probably going to leave it out for 30 minutes to an hour, maybe 2, and then stick it in the fridge. And when you stick it in the fridge up to like 30 to 60 minutes, it sets the structure of the bread and pauses the fermentation and slows it down. So the bread kind of holds its structure so that when you tap this out onto the pan, it doesn't just deflate and hold down, right? And that's the next video, we're gonna show you how to do that. But this guy here is now ready. This is the secondary fermentation and the final one. So what's gonna happen, again, you're gonna leave it on the counter, maybe stick it in the fridge for a half hour. If you do put it in the fridge to set the structure, I usually take it out of the fridge at least a half hour before you go to bake it. And we'll tackle how to bake it and everything in the next video.